Before we begin this editorial, I'd just like to point out that Sam, Adam and I are releasing a new documentary about the Golden Jubilee of the end of steam on the southern region of British Railways, which is based around this very subject. So if you'd like an hour-long piece featuring bullies, interviews, an EMU, and coverage of a rail tour from Waterloo to the West Country, Beyond the Sunset is coming soon to this channel. Paid only, DVD, probably some other ways. Okay, shameless plug over, let's get on with the real reason why we're here. Last year, we celebrated 50 years since the closure of the Somerset and Dorset and part of the Great Central Railway. This year, we're commemorating 50 years since the end of steam on the Southern, and next year, we're celebrating 50 years since the end of steam on BR at all. Except for the Vale of Rydal. Every time there's some kind of end of an era anniversary, the Heritage Circuit usually goes nuts over commemorating it, with gala weekends, special trains, mainline tours, and so on, cashing in on this idea. But that's a lot of pomp, circumstance, and even commercialism for what's basically the railway's equivalent of marking the day the music died. Many people seem to forget that these were not great days where everything was clean, on time, and in tip-top condition. Things were run down, dirty, late, and destined for decommission the moment they went wrong. Steam engines were living on borrowed time in the 60s and being worked into the ground until they could finally be withdrawn and sold off for scrap. Railwaymen and women lost their jobs and subsequently their way of life. And with half-assed rail replacement bus services, many communities lost their livelihoods as a result of losing their railway. There's a ton of archive programs out there covering this period, which could be seen as more unique than we tend to think of. If steam engines were humans and there were tons of archive shows looking at slave labourers being forced to work themselves until their destined execution, you'd feel a bit uncomfortable about that, wouldn't you? Okay, that's overthinking it slightly, but respectable people have looked at this subject in a much darker way than me, haven't they? What I'm trying to say here is, if such events really were so sad and tragic, why do we celebrate them the way we do? There's two theories I have which tie into each other because they're two of the main reasons we preserve railways in the first place.
The history theory.
Every heritage line is effectively a living museum, recreating scenes, practices, and traditions from a bygone age. When the paying public visits one of these lines, they're effectively stepping out of the real world for a few hours and going back in time to what the real world used to be like. And when we read about certain events that happened in history, it's all too easy to imagine what it must have been like to be there. I mean, how many of us can only dream what it must have been like to witness Woodstock or the moon landing, or in our case, the 15 Guinea Special? Well, thanks to hard-working volunteers and enthusiasts, you can kinda witness things like that. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it's the closest we're going to get until someone finally builds a time-traveling device that doesn't alter the past. With historic recreations, you can at least get a taste of how things used to be, and you have the choice of sampling that taste as often as you like, which ties us neatly into
the nostalgia theory.
Memories are an important part of evolution and development. We can use them to learn from our mistakes, replicate our victories, and remind ourselves that life wasn't always full of shit. As far as railways go, we tend to use them for all three. For the most part, steam railways can breathe new life into dwindling parts of our economy. They can replicate dioramas we may not see every day. And even for a couple of hours, they can take people away from the boring office, the tedious housework, and the compulsory education system that does little beyond scarring you for life. With both of these theories, the idea of commemorating the closure of a railway or the withdrawal of a locomotive is all part of reminding new generations of times gone by, and it's a damn sight more exciting to witness something than just read about it. But still, these things cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to buy, restore and run. Isn't that a bit much for something you can basically read about in the classroom? In my opinion, it's worth every penny because interactive learning in the outside world is way better than what you're dictated to in the classroom. How many of us can remember how exciting algebra was? Or what was on the left-hand side of the periodic table? I'm sorry, neither of these things were anywhere near as exciting as a visit to the World War I battlefields in Belgium. Interactive learning always wins, especially now that attention spans are getting shorter and nobody can concentrate for more than a few seconds at a time. You can read about the past, or you can witness an implication of what it was like. I say implication because you'll never truly recreate the past. Why is this? because we've ditched the drawbacks, usually because we've had to ditch the drawbacks. The People's Millions coach at the Bluebell Railway has been renovated to allow wheelchair-bound people to enjoy the look and feel of the old days without having to put up with sitting on a wooden slab. It doesn't matter how sick and twisted you are, you simply cannot expect disabled passengers to put up with possibly getting splinters where the sun doesn't shine. The Festiniog and Welsh Highland lines used to be run with rickety compartment stock with limited luxuries, but now most trains run with open saloon coaches, some of which have corridors and on-train catering. Expectations are just much higher nowadays. When a railway puts on a 1960s weekend and decides to play 1960s music on the station tannoy, what are the chances of them playing it from an iPod or a CD player through a lightweight digital amplifier instead of an LP through an old analog equivalent the size of Mexico that takes ages to warm up? If it really was the 60s, heritage railways would have no museums, no gift shops, no chance of legally getting to the engine sheds, nothing nutritious on the menu, and the trains would all be filthy. Oh sure, you'd get a wider variety of motive power and a better chance of high-speed running. But after a while, I'm fairly sure the majority of people would get pretty tired of going without modern convenience. You see where I'm going with this. I'm not saying it was all rubbish then and it's all great now, or vice versa. It's good to get the best of both worlds. We all love a throwback, but not the catch that goes with it. People love owning old cars, but they're at their best when they're reliable. People love old properties with thatched roofs and wooden beams, but it's nice when they're warm, don't leak, and are insulated with materials that don't burn. It's nice to travel in an old carriage, but not when you're squashed into standing room only with no heating in the winter. With steam railways, we've effectively been taking the best of the past and combining it with the best of the present so we can create the best possible future. Steam engines and old railways have faced uncertain times over the years, but just like the horse, the sailing yacht, and the Nintendo 64, they've never completely gone away. They've just shifted from mainstream use to a more niche market that's still open for everyone to enjoy when they choose. So perhaps that's it. Every time we celebrate the anniversary of a railway closure or Steam's demise, we're teaching people about the fact that it happened, but more importantly, we're celebrating the fact that it marks the beginning of a more enlightening time. An era where Steam itself hasn't actually ended, but has evolved into an experience that we can sample as much as we like. Still think the 60s were the glory days? Well, they had their highlights, but thanks to small crews of dedicated maniacs, those highlights will be with us forever. I'm Chris, and I'm here to gauge the issue.